Hello everyone. So the video you're about to watch is an interview done with New York University via Zoom. So in this video, you'll see myself, you'll also see Chelsea, and you will hear the teacher's voice. The questions that were asked by the students, I have recorded with my own voice, and throughout this video, you will see a logo, our logo, Living with XXY, in place of where the class was. So we hope you really enjoy this interview. This is a one-of-a-kind, amazing opportunity, and we hope all of you have a wonderful day. Enjoy.
Welcome to our class. This is Sexual Identities Across the Lifespan, and here are my old students. Do you guys want to say hi?
Hello.
We're very excited to have you. So if you don't mind, maybe if you guys want to introduce yourself. Ryan, I wanted you to introduce your guest as well, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. So if you don't mind doing it, and then we'll begin.
Yeah, I'm Ryan Bregante. I'm 35 years old. I was born with Klinefelter syndrome, and yeah, we'll get more into that as time goes on. I live in San Diego, California right now. That's where I was born. And Chelsea?
Hi, I'm Chelsea Castonguay. I am the mom of a 3-year-old son who has Klinefelter syndrome. And he was diagnosed when I was about 20 weeks pregnant. And I am the writing director for Living with XXY. So I get to work with Ryan really closely on a lot of really cool projects. And I currently live in Howland, Maine, which is the middle of nowhere.
Once again, welcome. I wanted you to start sort of with the conversation that we had on Zoom privately. Maybe why is it important to even have you guys here? Is it important for the students in my classroom to know and give you the opportunity to speak up and introduce yourself in your own way with your own story and your own experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give a little rundown about my life up until the point of starting the nonprofit. So I'm 35 years old. I was born in 1985. My mom had me when she was 42 years old. So back then, when it comes to health, over 40 was considered high risk, and they did an amnio on her, which got flagged as I had Klinefelter syndrome. So basically, my parents told me at 9 years old that I had Klinefelter syndrome, that this was me. And at 9, I knew I was different than a lot of my peers. And it's something that my parents, they didn't just drop the bomb on me about this is it. It was something that they just gave me, like they told me about it, and I accepted it at 9. And it's something that I just carried on with me as I lived my life. And a lot of people that don't know me, when I tell them about, when they find out about me through Living with XXY, I tell them that, I had basically what I did is with Klinefelter syndrome, I did my testosterone shots that I started at 13. So throughout my life, I did my testosterone shots, I did my blood work, I went to my doctor, and then I just lived my life. And my life consisted of lots of struggles, but lots of triumphs over those struggles. And for me, everything in my life, I've had to work 3 times or 4 times harder than everyone else. But with acceptance of my life and with acceptance of who I am as this is me, and this is what I've been given in my life, I've accepted those struggles, but I've also accepted those amazing things like being creative. I was a chef for 10 years in fine dining restaurants all across the United States. I was a photographer for a long time. So I have all these amazing, great qualities, but when you have so many struggles, when you read about Klinefelter syndrome online, you see nothing but struggles. And so at 9, I was bullied tremendously throughout my life in school. And a lot of people give me sympathy when I tell them I was bullied. And me being bullied was what made me who I am today, what made me resilient against haters and people out there telling me you're never going to be successful or whatever it is. And so that bullying and those struggles that I've experienced in my life have just built me up throughout life. And now that I'm 35, I definitely don't feel 35, but it's given me that confidence within myself to put my life on YouTube in 2017 to raise awareness about Klinefelter syndrome, which before, for me, before I would think I was about 31 years old when I started that YouTube channel. Before, I was just living my life, and whatever my challenges were, whatever was presented in front of me, my peers, acceptance, be yourself, that those situations, it was just me being me, and I didn't know anything else. And so in 2017, I actually went to a conference, and it was my first time meeting anyone else that had another X chromosome or other variations. And I saw a couple guys that I really got along with and met, and we were the same personality types. And I saw a lot of guys, you know, using their diagnosis to be a victim. And they were being a victim, whether they were personally doing it to themselves, or they were told by doctors throughout their whole life that they're never going to be able to graduate from high school, they're never going to hold a job, they won't ever be able to get married or have kids, all these negative things that they were told from other people. And after that, it was the first time in my entire life that I Googled Klinefelter syndrome. Before, when I was living with it, I was just doing my daily grind, you know, working on whatever struggles I had, accepting, hey, this is me. These are my challenges versus I'm not going to compare myself to other people. And bullying really made me like resilient to always listen to my inner self and not let other people constantly tell me who I am or what my identity is or all of these things. So when I Googled it for the first time, I went into like a research spiral. I researched everything. I read so many research papers, and it's so hard to read those in general. But I was just baffled by the amount of negative information that was online about Klinefelter syndrome when I've been working my ass off my entire life to get where I was. And despite all the struggles, there was nothing online that said all these amazing characteristics and traits about, you know, being photographic, having a photographic memory, being very hands-on, like kinetic learner. So if you show me how to do something, then I'm going to remember it and that's the way I learn, right? I was a chef. I went to the CIA, which is up in Hyde Park, New York, which maybe some of you are familiar with. So that's where I went to culinary school. So when I Googled it, I just was like, all these things are not me. Like, how is this? You know, I'm like, there's got to be other guys like me out there. So my good friend was just like, you know, we researched and we looked online, we looked on YouTube. There were no real videos. And my buddy was like, dude, you got to get on YouTube. And as a photographer, you're always behind the camera, and it's really hard to put yourself in front of the camera, and especially on YouTube with all the possible criticism and all that stuff. And the bullying was what taught me to, like, don't read the comments and don't take anything personal. And there's a lot of ignorant people out there that are going to judge you based on like you living your life. And who's to say that they know your life best, you know? And like, I know myself best. I'm not going to let anyone else tell me I can't do something or I'm not going to be successful. So I jumped on YouTube in 2017. I made a video, but it took me 43 tries to get that video to where I wanted it to be. So I was just resilient. I just kept doing it. I was like, my buddy was like, you have to do this. You're doing it. He supported me. My family supported me. And I jumped on YouTube. And from there, things kind of just took off. This community that has been in the shadows their whole lives. You know, if you were to look at me right now, standing here, and I was walking around in the street or walking around at your school, you wouldn't know that I had an extra chromosome. You wouldn't know that I was infertile, that my body didn't make testosterone, that I struggled with learning disabilities as a kid all throughout my life, and that I've had to adapt and make workarounds in my entire life to combat my struggles. For instance, like I have reading is really hard for me. So I figured out on the Mac, if you go to accessibilities, you can actually highlight text and do a bind key. So for me, I bound S. So I highlight something and then I just do Command S and it speaks it to me in this like computer voice, but it works. So I found workarounds my entire life. So I just decided, like, there's a lot of positive to this syndrome. There's a lot of positive that's not out there. There's got to be other men. It's 1 in 500 people. So there's got to be other men all around the world that have this, that are just like me, living their life. So I just continued to do YouTube, learned how to build a website on WordPress and built a .com website. And people just started pouring in from all over, Facebook groups and all these things. People just started messaging me, hey, I have that, I have this, I have that. So it just kind of opened up a community that was in the shadows that, you know, when you read about it online, or if you were to go onto your phone right now and you were to Google Klinefelter syndrome, you would get an image that Google has drawn of what it looks like to have Klinefelter syndrome. And our community is a spectrum. So there are people that are like heavily impacted, and then there are people that are very like impacted by just a few things. And that photo does not give justice to that spectrum of individuals who has this syndrome. And so it has a man standing with his arms on his hips, which is a very feminine position, because we have an extra chromosome, an extra X chromosome, which a lot of people say, oh, you have an extra female chromosome, so you're more feminine. Well, that's not necessarily true. Some guys might present that way, but most of our community doesn't. And so, you know, you have a guy with glasses. Glasses has a stigma as well. He's in his bedroom, and he's got his shirt off. So all the other conditions that you could Google, none of them have their shirt off. Now, I know why it has its shirt off, because it says glidocomastia, which we're about 30 to 35% of our community will have man boobs at some point. And a lot of our weight goes, you can't see my black shirt right now, but a lot of our weight goes to our lower abdomen, where that's the hardest place to lose it once you get weight there. A lot of us might have wider hips and narrower shoulders, and we're pretty tall. But as we said, it's a spectrum. So it's kind of, you know, that one image doesn't do justice of this community. And it kind of made me angry, because I'm sitting here and I'm like, there's so many people out there that have this, and they're not opening up about it because it's easier for them to hide behind it, because we are hiding in plain sight. You know, no one can tell physically or walking around, you know, in society that we have one of the most common chromosome conditions in men. No one can tell. So it's easier to hide behind it than it is to, you know, put yourself out there. And with all the stigma, with all the images on Google and the horrible research articles that say that they did in jail, that they say we're more likely to end up in prison, that your son's going to be mentally retarded. And Chelsea can speak on a lot of this stuff as a mother. So it's been 4 years of me from 2017 till now, 2021, where I left my career as a chef, as a highly successful action sports photographer. I've done a range of other jobs, but those are my two main careers. I left both those careers behind, and I've been volunteering my time. I've set myself up financially where I can volunteer. And so 4 years of no paycheck, no money coming towards me. It's been through passion, through love, through dedication, extremely hard work, which I'm used to, and not letting all these doctors and everyone else within the community, outside the community, other people trying to label me and tell me like who I am, right? So that's kind of been it's been a pretty crazy road. It's awesome to be here speaking in front of all of you. This is just another testament to our success and how we're making a huge difference for these unheard voices that our platform, Living with XXY, we've kind of, what I've decided and what I wanted to do is give all these people a voice. You know, all these people are afraid to come out. They're afraid of judgment, the stigma, the fear, male infertility. A lot of men don't want to speak up about being infertile. And so with this platform, I've given people a voice. We're making a documentary series where we have a podcast. So I do the podcast from this room. This is a bedroom in my house where I run the nonprofit. So giving people a podcast. Chelsea is the writing director. So we have lots of different ways for people to kind of put themselves out there, put photos of themselves and kids, and change the 5 decades of stigma that have been pushed on our community by the outside. And I've kind of been that voice. And so all of a sudden, all these people have now kind of backed me in that voice. And Chelsea, I'd like for you to kind of I'd say one of the biggest things about today is about acceptance, self-acceptance, is that we all are individuals. We all are individually unique. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, and some of you might have to study, some of you don't have to study. And you have your personality of like who you are, how you fit in socially. If you don't fit in socially, so what? Like it's all about just putting that, through everything that's going on in the world today as well, all the stresses, COVID, all these other things. Every person is unique, and you have to value yourself, and you can't let other people tell you who you are. That's basically a little bit about today. So Chelsea, could you kind of?
So before we go to Chelsea, thank you so much for this like huge introduction, a very important one. A long time ago when I was still in training, I worked with a woman who is a Holocaust survivor. She was in her 90s, and her story is quite traumatic and tragic in a lot of different ways. But I was very brand new in clinical psychology, and this was my training, my practicum. And so I told her in our conversation, what a story. And she said to me, it's not a story, it's my life. And I learned a huge lesson very early on as a clinical psychologist to allow people to tell their own sort of presentation. It's not up for me to sort of decide what that is. And I think we both agree on it. And I see Chelsea is nodding there as well. So that's why I wanted you guys to come here, and I wanted you to have an opportunity to present it from your perspective, because that doesn't happen often. As you said, it is defined on Google. It's defined in medicine. It's defined in psychology as well. We have so many different things that we put labels on, and we do it without the responsibility what that comes with. And I think people should have their own voice to be able to speak up for themselves, explain it and present it. And that's what we're doing today. So I'm very, very grateful. And thank you for putting yourself on YouTube, because that's how I found you. And a lot of the students were very excited to see you here today, and both of you. So thank you for being here, and we can go to Chelsea. Sorry for that. I just wanted to squeeze in.
No, thank you for being open to not teaching by the book, and not, that's where the book is teaching about the misinformation about our syndrome. And it's really amazing to have that opportunity with you, and the fact that you teach your students through this mindset, and that's truly incredible.
Thank you. It's an opportunity for all of us to learn, to know better, to learn acceptance, as you were saying. Chelsea?
Hi. Okay. So to go to this topic of acceptance, I found out that Noah was most likely going to have Klinefelter syndrome when I was about 20 weeks pregnant. Because I woke up one day and I just had this feeling that like something wasn't right with my pregnancy. And so I went and did the non-invasive prenatal testing, and the results came back. And I was really fortunate because my OB called and he explained what was going on. And he said, don't Google. Whatever you do, do not go online. Don't look this up. We're going to set you up with a genetics counselor. And so we did that. And the genetics counselor was wonderful. She explained in great detail, like what it was going to look like to have Noah, and that he was overall going to be healthy, and that he was going to be smart and probably very beautiful, all of these things he is, and that was going to be okay. And what I've learned since is that a lot of women don't have that same experience. Often they are recommended by their OBs to terminate their pregnancies. They are told this outdated information that Ryan shared with you already. And so as a result, going through my pregnancy, I felt really isolated and really not so much shame, but worry about what was going to happen once Noah was born, because I just didn't know. And also because it was a spectrum disorder, we didn't know what he would be like when he came out. And so he was born, and he was a huge baby when he was born, and he was gorgeous and wonderful and very healthy. And so after about a year, we hadn't really told anybody. We told a family member who had a really negative reaction to learning the news. He was holding Noah and he looked down at him and he said, I just can't believe there's something wrong with you. And I have to really stress that people with Klinefelter syndrome don't feel there's anything wrong with them, because there isn't. They just have an extra X chromosome. It's just an extra part of who they are. And so at the time, being a new mom and being really sleep deprived and just kind of freaked out by this situation, it made me kind of like go back into this place of fear and worry of like, what's going to happen? Is Noah going to grow up and be judged? Is he going to be rejected? Is society going to like think of him differently? And so I think, gosh, it was probably about 2 years into it. I told a few people, some people responded okay, some people didn't. I got a lot of like, oh God, I'm so sorry. I Googled it though, and he's probably going to be okay. And that was really difficult to deal with because then I would have to explain to them all this information that I had also learned. I have a master's in higher education. So I had spent a lot of time, researching and trying to understand what these studies were saying, and connecting with different researchers across the country, some good experiences, some not so great. And finally, I think it was Instagram is how I found Ryan. Actually, I was, searching and I messaged him and I told him a little bit about our experience. And I told him at the time that we were not telling anybody about Noah's diagnosis. And so he's like, well, come write for us and we'll kind of get you started that way. And I started telling our story, writing under a pseudonym and not telling anyone that we were working for the foundation. And as time went on and Ryan and I started talking more, I realized that there's this whole community of people who should not have to hide and who should not have to feel ashamed of something that's not their fault. There's nothing that anybody does that causes Klinefelter syndrome. It's, just a genetic luck of the draw. And so we started just telling more people about Noah, and I felt a lot more confident to explain it and to step in and correct the misconceptions and to very strongly and firmly correct those misconceptions. And so overall, it's going great. Like we have connected with the community in a wonderful way. We've met other moms and dads who have kids with Klinefelter syndrome. And now Noah has this huge community of really amazing mentors that he can look up to. So self-acceptance is a huge portion of how we're raising Noah. We talk about Klinefelter syndrome in our home really regularly in a way that makes it not a stigma, just something that's normal and something that he accepts. Noah was born with low muscle tone, so he does see a physical therapist and an occupational therapist. And for us, it's really important that that's just part of how Noah lives his life. We want him to have the care that he needs and to understand that he'll need some maintenance care throughout his life. Like he's going to need blood work like Ryan has. He'll need testosterone treatments. And I don't want him to be scared of that. I want him just to accept it the same way that somebody might if they had diabetes or asthma or something that requires some regular ongoing maintenance with a healthcare provider. And so far it's going great. He is just like the joy of my life. I love him so much and I can't imagine him any other way. He's smart and beautiful and kind, and he has the same, like the photographic memory that Ryan was talking about. He remembers everything. Like the minute he sees it or he hears it, it's locked in there forever, which sometimes works as a disadvantage to us, but like he'll remember something that we said like 6 months ago that we were going to do, and then or a toy that like got thrown out and all these things. But he's just such a wonderful human being and I just love him so much. But yeah, so like the acceptance piece is huge, and we struggle still with people kind of telling us like what he's going to be like or who he'll be, and we have to correct that. But I'm really glad to do that, and I'm really glad to share our family and to share our story, and because otherwise we're just a pretty normal family doing normal family things in the middle of nowhere, Maine. So yeah, anything else you want me to add, Ryan?
I think when it comes to acceptance, I think that there's this transfer of acceptance. So mothers get more and more families are being diagnosed in utero now due to non-invasive prenatal testing, or the NIP test. It's a lot of women are doing it over 35, and just more and more women are doing it in general. And they're finding out in utero that their son has this, and the information hasn't changed very much on the medical side. So they're being told, like Chelsea said, all these awful things, and I've experienced all of them. And when you're told something about your child before they're born, termination is one of the main go-tos for a lot of these families, unfortunately. But a lot of the families, when they find our YouTube, our Instagram, our website, they're like letting us know, like, wow, you guys really just brought up like the human aspect of this syndrome. Like, and we were just told all these things that our child's going to be a monster. And so I think one of the things is acceptance. So the family has to accept that their child is born with Klinefelter syndrome. Once they accept that, like Chelsea, then they can open up to all their friends and family and educate them, but also get support. Because a lot of these families, when they have their son, they go into hiding and they feel really alone and isolated with this. So then once they accept that, it might take some time. And once they accept that, then they have to transfer that acceptance to their child. So at a certain point, Chelsea, you've told Noah at 3. So, and you're obviously not telling him everything, but you're telling him age appropriate stuff. So then that acceptance is being transferred to the child, and that child is going to grow up knowing that they're different, but knowing that nothing's wrong with them, that this is who they are. And acceptance within our community is a huge thing, because a lot of men find out later on in life trying to have kids because we're infertile. So they'll be trying for kids for years or for a short period of time. They'll get this diagnosis, and men are told like, oh yeah, you're never gonna be able to be a father. That's it. Like that, they're not really given any information. And a lot of these men have like a really hard time with it. Like a day before their diagnosis, they were happy and living their life. After diagnosis, they're a completely different person. And that self-acceptance has to also come when they're diagnosed with this, because if they can accept like, well, this might take me a little bit of time to accept it, but if I can accept it, this is who I am. There's nothing wrong with me. I was living a great life before. I can continue to live a great life. I can do donor sperm or other micro-teats or adoption of other methods of becoming a father. That doesn't stop me from having kids. And so that acceptance piece is throughout our whole community. And once people come to that acceptance of, hey, this is me, this is who I am, they open up and they are like, I want to give back. I want to help people. I want to share my story. And so we have like I said earlier, we have podcasts and we have documentary series, YouTube, and written stories. So people can have a lot of avenues to share their voice and to give back. And that's what's so important about what we're doing.
How did you get to the acceptance piece? Like, how did you grow it? How did you find it? Like, how did it come about? Like, what helped on the way?
I think, okay, so when I was told at 9, it was something that like my parents, like Chelsea said, they didn't make it a big deal. They were like, you have struggles, you struggle with reading, writing, learning, school in general. I was also really tall. So I stood out. Kids called me twang because I had a gap in between my teeth. So I was bullied tremendously. And then in 8th grade, I got to the point where my parents calling the school, the teacher, like no one was helping with the bullying. So I just got this urge to stand up for myself. So in 8th grade, I stood up for myself, and it made an impact in me that I never thought I had. And I carried that with me throughout life to not let all these people constantly tell me who I am or bully me. All right. I accepted, I think that right there in 8th grade really taught me who I was and what I was capable of doing. And then I kind of when I was 25 years old, I moved to Vail, Colorado to work as a chef at this restaurant called Sweet Basil, which is a fine dining restaurant in the mountains in one of the most prestigious ski towns in America. And I was working and doing all that. And then I became a photographer during that time. And I ended up working in the snowboard industry. And I felt like I was totally different. I felt like I didn't fit in with all these professional snowboarders. I was this quirky, awkward, socially awkward dude, but I was around these guys because I had the talent to take photos of them. And I felt like I had to be someone else. And at that time, I moved to Utah, and I started lying, and I started doing all these things to make myself feel like I needed to be this cool, awesome person. And I bet you most of those people saw right through me and knew that I wasn't the person that I said I was. And I knew I wasn't who I was, but I felt like I had to be this person because I dropped back on that accepting myself because I was peer pressure and all these other people. And then over time, that just destroyed me, my relationships, my professional relationships, my career, just lots of other things kind of failed, started kind of going down. And I came to the self-realization on my 30th birthday. I took a doors off helicopter ride in Kauai. And I'm deathly afraid of heights, but I pushed myself because a friend who was a chef on a yacht at the time was like, this is one of the top 5 things I've ever done. And on my 30th birthday, it transformed me. I was taking photos of everything, and then something clicked inside of me and told me, focus on yourself, enjoy this ride instead of trying to capture it. And I turned around and put all that focus on myself. When I landed, I told myself at 30 that moving forward, I'm gonna be my ultimate self. I'm gonna find out who Ryan is. And from that aspect, I've been just pushing myself and then building this community. They've all accepted me for who I am. And so it's one of those things that I came to that realization of I'm not being my authentic self, and I need to be, and not let other people tell me.
All right. So since we can't have the audio of the class in this video for all of you, my voice is going to be asking the questions that the class asked me. And this question that was asked me was, did I feel isolated growing up? Did you feel if you had more community, you would have felt better?
No, so you're asking about if I had more community growing up, would I have not felt so isolated? I didn't feel isolated. I felt like I wasn't bullied because I had Klinefelter syndrome. I was bullied because I was tall. I mean, maybe I was bullied because of some of the attributes of Klinefelter syndrome, but I never. Well, my parents, I'm 35, my dad's 85, and my mom's 77. So I grew up with much older parents, and I never grew. My grandfather came over from Italy and worked really hard. And I came from this family where you're never a victim. You never, no matter what it is, if you put your head down and you work harder than everybody else, if you spend your weekends working while everyone's partying, you're going to rise to the top at some point in your life. For me, it just took a lot longer to rise to that top, but it wasn't, I didn't growing up, I didn't ever I never thought about having XXY or Klinefelter syndrome. That never once came into my mind. Like once I was told, I was like, okay, cool. This is me. This is my life. Like Chelsea said, like, it's part of Noah's life. Like he doesn't treat it any differently. So does that kind of answer your question?
All right. Question number 2. There's lots of misinformation about Klinefelter syndrome in the medical field. Is there anything that you learned about yourself that you shared with your parents that they didn't know about you? Was there anything that you debunked since they didn't have the information?
Yeah, so when I was born in 1985, my parents were lawyers, and my mom had access to the medical libraries, and there was no information, there was no internet, none of that stuff. And there was one article from Denmark that had a little bit of information that she had access to, and these were like all papers that they had to like go through and read through and all this, like nobody would ever, kind of like a library, but way bigger. And I think in that article, it just said, talk to your kids. It said, be as, like, make them talk, like, be as communicative as possible. And that was it. That's all my parents had. So I think that my mom, testament to my parents of raising me the way they did. My parents were very successful in law, and my mom was one of the top lawyers in her field, and also in the men's field of being a woman at that time. And she gave up everything, her whole entire career, to take care of me, to help me, push me, and do whatever it needed to give me the best life I possibly could have. And that is like huge. And I give everything to my parents. So they adapted to me. They put me in lots of learning. I did like hooked on phonics when I was a kid, when it was being made fun of. I did Sylvan Learning Center. I did Fast Forward. I did all these programs at the time, and they like listened to therapists and other people that were teaching me about how I learned. And then they adapted their lifestyle, and they adapted to teach me everything about how I learned instead of like how they learned. So we did lots of flashcards. My dad would, there's a YouTube video of me doing it with my dad. He would write a word with the like synonyms, or like he would spread the word out, and he would write the sections in different colors, and I'm visual. So that's how I learned how to spell bigger words and understand. So I could memorize the word visually, picture it in my mind, and then he would ask me like to say it back to him, and I could do it. And then what I could also do is I could spell the word backwards. And so they kind of adapted their parenting style to helping me. And now they're the most supportive. They've been the most supportive people ever since I started all of this. Knowing that I'm taking a financial burden in a sense on myself to do this, they're completely supportive. And I go to them, and I'm a talker, so I go to them I live about 15 minutes away from them, and I explode with information, and they listen. There's only so much that they can take because they're a little bit older, but they're 100% supportive of everything, and they're amazed on the massive community that we've created in a short period of time.
All right. Question number 3 was for Chelsea. How would you want the medical community to change how they help parents and people with Klinefelter syndrome?
This is a question that I've given a lot of thought on, so thank you for asking that. And I want to backpedal a little bit, because when I say I had a great experience, like, it was still traumatic. It was still very traumatic to find out that I was pregnant with a child who was going to have something like wrong with them. And I use that in quotes because I cannot stress enough that I don't feel that Noah has anything wrong with him. And all I knew about Klinefelter syndrome was from taking a genetics course in my undergrad, probably 7 years beforehand, and it was not complimentary. And I found out by my OB calling me and telling me at like 6 o'clock at night, and it was a very brief conversation. And then I had no information for 2 weeks because, once again, living in rural Maine, that's how long it took for us to get to a genetics counselor, and we had to drive 2 hours to meet with one. But that being said, once again, it was a much better experience than most women have. So what Ryan, I think, also agrees with is we're working really hard to start connecting with healthcare providers so that we can offer them opportunities to grow how they deliver this information to patients. Often, I've been working with a lot of moms. We're working on a project right now, talking with mothers about how they've received this news, or were given this news rather. And a huge thing that we've discovered is that providers don't know anything about it, or what they do know is really outdated information. So they're focusing on those negatives once again, rather than the many, many positives that can come from having this syndrome. And also that, your child can have very minimal impacts from it. Noah's very minimally impacted. And I think part of that's because we've known since he was, when I was 20 weeks pregnant with him, so we were prepared. But I really would like to see providers in all walks, whatever they are working on, be kind, be compassionate, take the time to meet with their patients in person and talk to them. A lot of times over the phone, I think that's really impersonal. And this is something that has such a significant impact on many lives, not just the mother, not just the father, but also the child. And goes back to that acceptance of how people hear that news is how they're going to feel about the pregnancy, how they're going to feel about their unborn son, and how they're going to feel about their son when he is born. And I think that ongoing education is critical. A lot of what these doctors are working with is information that is 30, 40, 50 years old and is very outdated. And we've also had parents just hear the most wildly inaccurate things. Like, one mother was told that she was 50% more likely to have a child with another chromosomal variance if they had another pregnancy, which is completely untrue because Klinefelter syndrome is a totally spontaneous thing. We've had mothers, once again, we've had people be told by the providers that their child is going to be a monster, using those exact phrases. Others who have been hounded by their providers to terminate their pregnancy right up until the last time when they could no longer terminate the pregnancy after they had clearly told them, no, I don't want to do that. Sorry, I kind of went on a tangent here, but this is something we're really passionate about, is helping providers understand that this is not a death sentence of a diagnosis by any means. And they really need to focus on empowering their patients to fully understand so that they can make the best choice for them, the most informed choice with the most accurate, up-to-date information. And I think also that for an OB who maybe doesn't have as much experience, pairing this conversation with a genetics counselor or with a geneticist is really, really important. And then mothers should immediately be referred to a geneticist or to a genetics counselor so that they can follow up and have those conversations within the next day or two, because waiting 2 weeks was absolutely, agonizing.
We
Did
were,
that answer your question?
one more thing to add to that. So we were contacted by Oxford University, which is in the UK. And it was about a year ago, and they asked us to, they wanted to use a photo on our website of this kid named Luke. And it was the first time in their book, and I'm pretty sure all textbooks, that a person of a real person without their shirt off, without a black strip through their eyes, of just someone living with Klinefelter syndrome that was ever used in a publication, in a book, especially in a college textbook. And so we went back and forth with them. They were trying to use 3 outdated studies from 1985, 2000, and I think 1979. And they were trying to basically when you read about the blurb about Klinefelter syndrome, it was basically stating that all men through these studies will be gay. And it was like, okay, so you want us to give you a photo, but then this boy is 15 or 16 years old. He doesn't even have a voice, because you're automatically telling us through these studies that are way outdated that he doesn't have a choice. So that was a huge turning point, is we actually got them to listen to us, that, hey, our community is no likely to be gay or trans or anything else other than the normal population. And that was a huge just win for everyone in our community, to not be judged based off of really outdated information.
Thank you. And so it's important to have this conversation. And so I'm really happy that both of you actually found time to be here, because we have about 40 students in this classroom, including me. So there are going to be professionals that are going to come out of NYU here, right? I don't know that we could ask, but I don't want to waste your guys' time. And we're going to maybe have medical doctors coming out of here. We might have psychologists that can come out of here. We might have so many different professions represented in here in the future. So how great is that we get to be exposed by the real information and the right information, right? So I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity. So thank you again. Just want to mention that, right?
Of course, thank you.
Thank you. And I mean, we're happy to answer any more questions that you folks might have or anything like that. Noah is happily occupied with Paw Patrol right now, so I have a few minutes free.
Question number 4. Is there any therapy for health or for mental health for kids or adults with Klinefelter syndrome?
I think when it comes, you're asking about if are there therapies or anything like that to help. I think awareness. So majority of men that have their Klinefelter syndrome know nothing about their own syndrome. So educate, before I started doing all this advocacy work, this nonprofit, I trusted all of my doctors with all of my medical, my hormones, everything. I just lived my life. And I think that's majority of our community. They don't really understand their own syndrome and how it impacts them, and how we're more susceptible to metabolic syndrome, high cholesterol, heart disease, stroke, heart attack. And then when we're on testosterone, it might increase your blood, your hemoglobin levels, which I'm actually experiencing now. I have to give blood. So when it comes to therapy, it's more of, most men probably don't think that they need therapy, and accepting themselves and being like, there are these other methods. Because when everyone hears therapy, everyone turns the other way. Oh, I don't need that. Why would I need that? Why do I need to talk to someone? But what we're doing now is we have a couple advocates. My friend Gareth, who lives in Ireland, who found out later on in life trying to have kids. He's now on our YouTube channel making videos, and he talks about how therapy really helped him. So what we're trying to do is get our community to open up and be in these social highlights of on putting their face out there. And then I think more men will then see that other men are getting success from therapy or other aspects of mental health, and they might accept themselves and be like, yeah, I should try that. I struggle with that myself of do I, because I talk to so many people who want help, and then I also need my own help as an empath. So I struggle with that, but I don't think Chelsea, there's no, other than when kids are diagnosed in utero, there's like physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, and there's some of these things that some kids do and some kids don't based on the spectrum. But that's what we're trying to figure out is, are there specific things that can help? Some people also say cognitive behavioral therapy, or in autism, it's ABA. Some families have kids with autism as well as Klinefelter syndrome, and they said that those have been really successful.
Really good answer. Thank you. I have a question, like if you don't mind me asking, how much did you struggle with your own masculinity? And what I mean by that is proving that you are, like in terms of other people's perceptions, and proving maybe to yourself that you're like everyone else in a sense. Like, how did you go through that within yourself? Was that a struggle? I'm sure it has been to some degree. Like, how did you go about that? See, if you're diagnosed with something that it gets stigmatized, and maybe you have an additional like X chromosome, you might not be potentially a man enough. Like, how did you like process that for yourself, and how difficult it was, and what did you do?
I don't think I could give a couple examples, but I don't think I ever struggled with masculinity or anything like that. I always knew that I was a boy, a man. I never had identity issues or any of that. I've always dated women. I'm heterosexual. I've never had any of those identity. But when it comes to one of the things that I could say is when growing up, when starting testosterone at 13 or 12. I started at 13, that going to the doctor and having the doctor check your testicles, because majority of us, I can't speak for everyone, but majority of us have small testicles. So I did a TikTok a while ago for all the young kids, and it's like pistachios. They're the finest nuts of them all. Like they're tiny, but that's just how I've known about that my whole life. And I know it's a psychology class, so it's okay. A lot of men haven't accepted themselves having small testicles, but it's one of those things that's like, I can't do anything about it. I don't want to do anything about it. Like, I've had nothing but positive reviews from dating my entire life about that. And so I've kind of taken it as that hasn't been an issue in my life. I'd say the only challenge that I had was just like, I knew I was different growing up, and the locker room was always kind of weird. Like, locker rooms for me have just been always like this uncomfortable situation, or going to like and I don't know if that's because I have XXY or just just in general, that situation has been like, I think you notice other guys, and you notice that they have like a lot larger testicles. But I never was there like, oh, wait, is there anything like, but I also found out early. So if we were to ask that question to a guy that was diagnosed later on in life, they might have more of an answer to kind of that question.
Add on to the topic about masculinity as well. One thing that we've noticed, and Ryan and I have talked about this quite a bit, is that oftentimes when we're working with families, we find that it's the moms who are driving the research and they're driving the appointments, and the dads tend to take almost a back seat to it. And we've really talked a lot about like why that is, and what is it that causes the dads to kind of step back, oftentimes even from their son's own raising. And we've met with fathers and done video or interviews with them, and the fathers can't even like look us in the eye. And it's clear that they're really experiencing some type of shame or embarrassment around their son's diagnosis. And a lot of times topics of traditionally masculine themes come up, so like that they can't have children, that they can't carry on their family name, that they are not going to play sports, and all these things we know are not true, but that's a lot of what we're finding that we're trying to figure out is how do we help people understand these areas of masculinity, and then also redefine those areas of masculinity for them so that they can be the best support to their sons and love their sons no matter what. So for example, my husband grew up playing sports. I mean, he was, a 3-season sports player, went to camps, got a scholarship, all of that. I did a season of swim and bailed on it because I hated it. So, sports are not important to me, but they're important to him. And never once has my husband been like, oh, well, Noah better play soccer, Noah better do this. We just believe that we will support Noah in whatever he ends up deciding is interesting or whatever passion he wants to pursue. That to us does not mean masculinity. But we're realizing to other people, sports does equate masculinity, or having children does equate masculinity. So there is some struggle there in the community still on the paternal side. I can't speak about men with Klinefelter syndrome because I am not a man with Klinefelter syndrome, but that's the area I work with. So I hope that made sense.
Now that like I think about your question, and now that I talk to a lot of men that get diagnosed right away. I talk to a lot of people in general, but a lot of men have this feeling once they get diagnosed, and diagnosis and syndrome, those words in general are negative or not like the greatest words. So a lot of them experience like not being able to get their wife pregnant. So, and they don't have sperm. So they experience this like, they just get this rush of like, I'm not a man, I can't provide for my wife, I can't do this, I can't do that. Like all these masculine things that a man could provide for their wife, they all of a sudden feel, a lot of them go into depression. Some have come to me with thinking about suicide. And it's just all across the board. I think it depends upon your upbringing, how you were raised, how your confidence, your insecurities, like a lot of those things also affect how the diagnosis affects the person, and also how they were told by their provider and in the manner that they found out.
So question number 5, how impactful do you feel Klinefelter syndrome has been in forming relationships such as platonic, professional, and romantic?
That's a good question. So I'll speak on my behalf for me, but then also kind of a little bit about the community. Since it's a spectrum, I do talk to a lot of guys that do struggle with like group situations. They're better at one-on-one. Where a lot of us are very, it takes us a lot. So so right here, that's where the camera is. If you've been noticing, I look down a lot. It's very hard for me to look people in the eyes, especially in an interview. I'm photographic. So my brain is, everything that I see is like pictures and colors and all like visual. So when it comes to articulating, it takes, and I've learned through time that I was not like this or this articulate as a child, but it takes time to translate the visual into verbal and then have it actually come out the way that you thought about it. And I attribute it to like foot and mouth syndrome or however that goes. Sometimes you say something and you're like, oops, I shouldn't have said that, but or I said it in the wrong context that I thought about it. So it takes us a little bit longer to maybe communicate our thoughts. So when people are in a group and there's constant conversation, a lot of us are observers. So we sit back, we watch, observe, and we pay attention. Like for me, I pay attention to body language more than anything. And I can tell by body language how someone feels, how they interact. Like a lot of the men and babies in our community are empathic. So they really pay attention to those feelings and the visual aspect. So the communication is a lot harder. But we're really good. A lot of us are really good on those one-on-one instances, and we're very detailed. So if I'm in a big group and I'm called upon to like tell my side of the story, or like I have a joke or something, I have to like be like, oh, and her shoes had like multicolor laces, and she was wearing this, and this was the weather, and like I describe everything that I see, and because to me that is what's important in my mind. And everyone else is like deer in the headlights. And they're like, so what's the point? Like, what's the point of your story? And so when it comes to communication, I'd say through practice, I think a lot, like for me, through practice and just constantly putting myself in those awkward social situations, I know I'm awkward, but I like have to push myself to be in that situation. And then like in an interview, I haven't had an interview in a really long time, but I would kind of just put myself out there. It's like, I'm really good at learning this way. This is how I can do it really efficiently, probably faster than everyone else that's doing it this way. But I really struggle in these aspects. And some employers might, treat that as like, oh, we're not going to hire you because and I never treat it as a disability. But as far as, it's a pretty general question, but I'd say communication has definitely been difficult throughout life, especially just with language in general, but through practice and never giving up, and not letting the introverted side take over and isolate yourself at home and not pushing yourself to be in those social situations, because you can't learn if you're constantly in your house, locked in your room, playing video games by yourself.
A little bit about that with Noah. So, due to COVID, we haven't really gone anywhere in the last couple years. But when we do, Noah I was kind of like laughing when Ryan was talking a little bit, because Noah shares so many of those same qualities that Ryan has. He's extremely empathic. He's really intuitive. And there's just something about him that people are really drawn to. So we'll be in stores and people just like come up to him and they're interacting with him and talking to him and commenting on him. And he really loves that. And he loves like really intensely like studying people and getting to know people. So in our family, I wouldn't say that it's impacted our relationship so much. The relationships with the family members that have had negative responses to it are strained, to be perfectly honest, but they're strained partly because of other things, not just due to that. That was kind of like the icing on a very crummy cake in regards to dealing with those people. And now that I feel like really strong about it, and that I feel like I have a really strong knowledge and understanding, I'm not afraid to talk to people about it, and I'm not afraid to correct people. So, like I've had the people that like I'll tell them and they like run to Google and I'll be like, please do not repeat the things to me that you've looked at on Google. Please let me tell you about Noah. Please let me explain my son to you, because I know him best. And I have, out of all the people in the world, I've read a lot about this syndrome. I understand it really, really well. So please let me educate you and don't play Dr. Google with me. And so for the most part, like, sometimes they're a little like, oh, okay, well, I had my Google and I know. And I'm like, but you don't. And then once I explain to them, they're pretty understanding. And we haven't lost any relationships that weren't already like kind of going downhill because of this. And we haven't severed any ties or anything like that. And once people know about Klinefelter syndrome, they're usually just like, oh, okay, that's fine. And that's really about the end of it. So a lot of our work is destigmatizing this and also demystifying it too. And breaking it down in a way that people can understand. So I had a friend a couple months ago message me really out of the blue, and she was like, I've seen a lot of your posts about Klinefelter syndrome and I feel like I don't understand. Can you explain it to me? Like, she's like, can you break it down so that I can understand it? And I did, and we had a really great talk about it. And then she was like, thank you. I feel so much better now. And I feel like I can ask questions and I'm going to get an answer. So, also on our part, being really open, being understanding of people when they don't understand or they're trying to educate themselves, and knowing that for the most part, it does come from a place of like, I just want to be there for you. I want to support you, but I don't know how. So did that answer your question?
This fifth question was asked to Chelsea. How did you frame the conversation with your son about his diagnosis so that it wasn't intimidating or confusing? Did you try to explain what chromosomes are? How did you do it?
One thing that like in our family, I have adult ADHD. I've been living with it my entire life. I wasn't diagnosed until my mid-20s, but I have a non-neurotypical brain. And my poor husband is the neurotypical person in our family. So he's the one that's like always try to like hold everything together while Noah and I are like spinning around. And so we just sort of like accept people for who they are and how they think in our family and like our processes. So for Noah, we just would say like, you go play with Miss Andy, who's his physical therapist, and you go play with Miss Laura, who is his occupational therapist. And we just make that part of his daily experience and his daily life. And then when I started working for Ryan, I was transcribing interviews of men who had Klinefelter syndrome, which was really a huge part of my transformation of kind of like coming out of the closet about this and sharing it with other people, because like all these men, they're like beautiful and smart and strong, and they have wonderful careers. And even the ones that had rocky upbringings have really overcome that. And they're excited to share their lives with people. And so Noah would come up, as toddlers do, and I would say, oh, this is Jeff. He's a chef and he lives in Australia and he has Klinefelter syndrome like you do. And he would say, okay. And then, he'd run off to do his thing. And when I like FaceTime with Ryan to talk, Noah often is in and out, and I'll explain to Noah, like, this is Ryan. He also has Klinefelter syndrome like you do. So he can see that there are these people who have this, who are living their normal lives, who are doing their normal things, who are a part of society, and they're perfectly fine. And he is going to be perfectly fine. And so it's just something that's just part of our daily life and part of our, like, the language of our family and our family culture. And it's not going to change. We're just going to continue. And as he goes, gets older and can understand more, we will explain more to him. But yeah, like, I mean, gosh, it's hard to explain chromosomes to like regular, adults. And
I don't even like,
right.
to be honest, the scientific side of a lot of this stuff, I haven't even had I have the desire, but I don't even have, like, there's so much other stuff. And it's a really good question, because that question is probably one of the number one questions we get from like newly diagnosed mothers that aren't even, their child isn't even here yet. And they're constantly like, well, how are we going to, like, how do you tell your child? What do you say? What do you do? And I think it's like, I kind of describe it in the analogy, because I speak in a lot of analogies, it's like the birds and the bees, when no one wants to have that conversation with their parents. So don't make it that conversation. It's something that if we, instead of dropping the bomb all at once on your 11 or 12-year-old, because so with our community, since our bodies don't make testosterone, at around 10 to 13, they start going to the doctor more, getting blood work to check for testosterone levels, and then they might need supplemental testosterone for puberty. And so a lot of families will tell their kids, like, right then and there before they start getting all these tests. And one of the things is, like, I think that if we can educate these kids earlier, because we know we're different, like, we know we kind of, I knew that I was different from my peers growing up, but I just didn't know exactly why. I kind of tell people, like, I view the world from a drone perspective. I see it all versus like living it from eye to eye. And so I think that's a big fear question for our community, is like, how, and we're actually working really hard to try to produce some resources in the next like 6 months to a year to help with those conversations, of normalizing telling their kids about, like, hey, this is what you have, but not allowing them to use it as a victim, because that's also a very fine line, is how do they tell them? And then if they constantly blame everything, all their problems as a young kid on these issues, that can create other psychological stuff. So thanks for
also not shocking them with this information, right? Because you're like, going back to the, like, Ryan knew all along that something was wrong. Like, growing up, I knew something was wrong with the way I thought, because I like didn't fit in and I thought differently and I struggled in school, like all these things. And then finally at like 24, I got this diagnosis, and I was like, God, wouldn't that have been nice to know when I was in elementary school and like failing classes because I couldn't pay attention and all this stuff. So we want kids to know that this is just a part of who they are. It is not the sum total of who they are. It's a component of the things that make them them. And that's how we're focusing on that with Noah. It's just like a part of his life that will always be there, will always need maintenance, will always need care. And that's not a bad thing. Like, we all have things about us that need maintenance and care. That's why we have healthcare. That's why we have mental health care, all these things. So, we want parents to like be proud of that and to like cue their kids in early, so they're not shocked at 13, 14, 15 with this like component of their life that they didn't know existed.
That you have a friend that has some of the symptoms of possible Klinefelter syndrome, and how to, like, if you're friends. So communication is really important on maybe we have a YouTube channel. I've got some great YouTube videos of me traveling and doing other things and just talking about it. We have Instagram. So maybe it's something that you can just, when you're flowing through social media or something, you can be like, you could talk about this class, about learning about it, and you could present that to him in a non like
threatening idea. I like that.
Or not putting him in a box and not wanting him to like push back against you. And because as soon as he'll Google it, there's that denial of like, no, that's not me. But it could be, but he doesn't, but people don't want to, like, they don't want to accept it.
And you don't want to be confronted, right? You might not want to hear it. And so like presenting it as you're saying, I think this is a really good answer. Like, hey, we had a class today, this is what happened. Like, isn't that interesting? And see how it goes and see what comes out of that.
Add to that, a lot of the symptoms of Klinefelter syndrome are similar to others. There are some that are really like the hallmark symptoms, like the gynecomastia and the height and the extended limbs. But like Ryan said, not the majority of people with Klinefelter syndrome don't have those. So there are other syndromes that can kind of play in there. So you also don't want to just assume that this is what this person has. But I always think, sharing information can't hurt as long as you do it in like a non-threatening or accusatory type of way. Just be like, hey, saw this post, maybe you might want to read it.
Yeah, and one of the things so Klinefelter syndrome happens to between like 1 in 500, 1 in 650, 1 in 1,000, depending upon where you find those resources. Only 25% of us will find out that we have a diagnosis at some point in our life. 75% will die never knowing that they had this syndrome. And so we're hiding in plain sight. We're out there. There could be people in the classroom or your friends or other people that could have this and you would have no idea. And so when it comes to like moving forward in your careers and being around people and seeing us talk about this, it's just one of those things that you might continue to research it after this class, or you might continue to learn about it, and just make sure that you go into it with that open mind of, there's that saying with autism that you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. It's the same with our community, is everyone has that spectrum. And that's one of the things that's not talked about in the medical community and online, is it doesn't say that this syndrome is a spectrum and there are people affected in different ways.
What a great way to finish it. I really like it. And this is the reason why I invited you. And I'm so grateful that both of you had time to join us. Once again, I don't know if we even need to do it, but we have like a few minutes left. There are going to be 40 people that are going to have lives outside of this class and going to go into different professions. I'm also a professional in this field, right? You guys are aware of it. What's the message? What should we take out of this? Like, what's the most important thing? I think you just mentioned that, or maybe there's something else I don't want to like decide on that. What should we take? What kind of awareness and knowledge should we take out of this session together today? Not a session, a meeting.
Chelsea, you want to like put in like a 1 minute and I'll follow up?
Yeah. I think the big thing is compassion, kindness, consideration to your care and your practice, and treating every single person like an individual, and assuming that when you meet them, you know nothing about them and you need to learn about them. Don't give them labels. Don't tell them who they are or what like is expected, I guess, because everyone's so different. Like Ryan said, it is a spectrum. So some people will be so minimally impacted and some people will be more severely impacted. So just really be adaptable and flexible, kind and compassionate. That's my biggest takeaway to you.
I think I've said a lot of the things throughout. I think awareness is key within Klinefelter syndrome or within any type of very unique syndrome. But if any of you become doctors, listen to your patients. Or if you become psychologists, really listen to them, because
and to their parents.
We just got a comment on YouTube before I started this, and it said, who are you to tell doctors, what to do, or you don't know what you're talking about. And it's like I've been having a really hard time in healthcare, knowing what I know and finding my doctors that listen to me and not try to be like, well, I'm the doctor and you're the patient. Just treating everyone with respect and kindness. And I think those are things right now that with social media and all the crazy fast world that we live in, empathy is probably one of the most important things that's really lacking in society.
Great. So last two things, maybe. I wish we could get involved as a class and help you guys somehow. Maybe in the future, if you and I can talk about it outside of it, we can, as an NYU, we can do something for your organization. So, but how can people find you, both of you? Do you want to share your social media information so that in case people don't know, like, how can they get involved, where they can read more, like where's all of that? I know it, but do you want to share it?
Yeah, so on Instagram, it's at living with XXY. So if you were to Google living with XXY, most likely everything would pop up with what we're doing, but website, livingwithxxy.org. TikTok, I think it's like living with X, it's on there, but I don't post much on TikTok. We're on Facebook, living with XXY, YouTube, same thing. Pretty much everything we're doing. If you see this logo, that's what we're doing. If you want to reach out to me personally, it's Ryan at livingwithxxy.org. And Chelsea is what? How do you spell it, Chelsea?
CHELSEA at livingwithxxy.org. So if you have like volunteer opportunity or you want like something, gosh, sorry, I need coffee. If you would like to volunteer, please reach out to me directly and I can find you like a different opportunity. We've got a lot of need, as most nonprofits do.
Are you open for like volunteering experiences, or if people were to like reach out and try to help your organization some kind of a way, are you open to that?
Yeah.
Very, very great for the both of you. Thank you so much.